15 years ago, a school bus carrying 23 children and 2 adults disappeared on a rural highway, leaving families shattered and a community in disbelief. The investigation focused on the bus driver, who vanished alongside the children, but with limited evidence and no witnesses, the case eventually went cold. Through all these years, one mother refused to surrender hope, convinced that her daughter was still alive somewhere. Then one morning, while sorting through old photographs, she discovered a detail everyone had overlooked, a detail that would unravel the entire case and expose a truth more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. Margaret Wilson awoke on September 16th, 2023, her chest heavy with familiar dread. The grey autumn sky outside her bedroom window mirrored her mood perfectly. She had been preparing herself for this day, but the weight of grief still felt overwhelming. It marked exactly 15 years since her daughter Emily had disappeared. Margaret slowly rose from her bed and padded across the hardwood floor to her dresser. There, propped against the mirror, was a school portrait of Emily in her blue uniform, her bright smile revealing a missing front tooth. Margaret gently traced the outline of her daughter's face with her fingertip. "Oh, Emily," she whispered, her voice catching. 15 years, I've never stopped looking." A text message illuminated her phone screen. It was from her friend Sarah Coleman. "Thinking of you today. You're not alone. Come over whenever you need company." Sarah had also lost her son, Michael, on that fateful day. Their shared grief had forged an unbreakable bond between them. After dressing, Margaret gathered a small box of homemade cookies and her collection of old case files, a ritual she had maintained for years. As she stepped outside, the cool September air brushed against her face. Her neighborhood looked much the same as it had 15 years ago, while everything in her life had been irrevocably altered. Sarah greeted her at the door with a silent embrace that spoke volumes. No words were needed between them on this day. "I made tea," Sarah said softly, leading Margaret to her kitchen. The familiar scent of chamomile filled the air as Margaret settled onto a worn sofa. "How are you holding up?" Sarah asked, placing 2 steaming mugs on the coffee table. Margaret sighed, cradling her cup between her palms. "About the same as every year. Sometimes I think I'm healing, and then this day comes around again." "I know," Sarah nodded. "Dr. Harris says grief isn't linear. We shouldn't expect it to be, especially with no closure." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the unspoken understanding between them more comforting than any words could be. "I brought some things," Margaret said eventually, reaching for her worn leather messenger bag. "I've been going through everything again." Sarah's expression shifted, concern clouding her eyes. "Margaret." "I know what you're going to say," Margaret interjected gently. "But I'm not obsessing. I found some photos I hadn't looked at in years." She pulled out a manila envelope and carefully extracted several photographs. Sarah moved closer, her curiosity overcoming her hesitation. "Where did these come from?" Sarah asked, studying the images. "Remember Deputy Fletcher? He retired last year and gave me copies of everything from the case file, said he always felt bad about how it ended." The photos showed various scenes from Pinewood Elementary School on the day of the field trip. Children loading onto the yellow bus, teachers checking attendance sheets, parents waving goodbye. "I've studied these 100 times, Margaret said, spreading them across the coffee table. "But last night, I noticed something." She pointed to a photo of the bus just before departure. In the background stood Principal Robert Harmon, speaking with an unfamiliar woman. "Do you remember her?" Margaret asked, her finger hovering over the woman's face. "She's not on the school staff list." Sarah leaned closer, squinting. "No, I don't recognize her." "But it was 15 years ago, Margaret. Memory plays tricks on us." "That's what I thought too," Margaret replied, her voice gaining intensity. "But look at this." She pulled out another photograph, this one taken from the school security camera. The same woman was visible, speaking with the bus driver, Malcolm Reeves. "The police report never mentioned this woman," Margaret continued. "I checked every name, and look at her hand, she's passing him something." Sarah frowned. It could be anything. Permission forms, lunch money? Maybe, Margaret conceded. But why wasn't she mentioned anywhere? Not in a single witness statement. Sarah sighed, placing her hand over Margaret's. I understand wanting answers, I do, but we've been down so many roads that led nowhere. Margaret nodded, acknowledging her friend's concern. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled onto something significant. After finishing her tea, she hugged Sarah goodbye, promising to call later. Instead of going home, Margaret drove to the Oakdale Police Department. The station looked smaller than she remembered, its brick facade weathered by time. Inside, the familiar smell of coffee and paper greeted her. Mrs. Wilson, Officer Daniels said, looking up from his desk. The younger officers might not know her face, but the veterans certainly did. It's that time of year again. Hello, Officer Daniels, she replied. Is Detective Rivera in today? Detective Sophia Rivera had taken over the case 5 years ago when the previous detective retired. Though the case was technically cold, Rivera had always made time for Margaret. She's in her office, Daniels said, his expression softening with sympathy. Go on back. Margaret found Rivera at her desk, surrounded by case files. The detective looked up, not surprised to see Margaret standing in her doorway. Margaret? Rivera said, standing to offer her a chair. I was going to call you today. You always do, Margaret replied with a small smile. I appreciate that. Rivera nodded, her dark eyes warm with compassion. 15 years is a long time to keep fighting. Not when it's your child, Margaret said simply. She placed the photographs on Rivera's desk. I found something. Rivera studied the images carefully, her brow furrowing. This woman, she's not in our files. Exactly, Margaret exclaimed, her heart racing. Someone interviewed everyone at the school that day. How was she missed? Rivera leaned back in her chair, contemplative. Let me run her face through our database. It's a long shot after so many years, but technology has improved. As Rivera scanned the photograph, Margaret felt a flutter of hope in her chest, a dangerous feeling she had learned to suppress over the years. I'll need some time with this, Rivera said finally. Can I keep these? Margaret nodded. I made copies. There's something else? She hesitated. Principal Harmon retired last year, right? Yes, moved to Arizona from what I heard. But his wife still lives here. I saw her at the grocery store last month. Rivera raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking, Margaret? I'm thinking I should pay her a visit. The detective's expression turned cautious. Margaret, I understand your determination, but please let me handle the investigation. If there's something here, we'll find it. Margaret agreed, but as she left the police station, she had already made up her mind. The next morning, she drove to the quiet suburban neighborhood where Patricia Harmon still lived. The modest ranch-style house looked well-maintained, with potted mums decorating the front porch. Margaret's palms were sweaty as she rang the doorbell. What would she even say? After a moment, the door opened to reveal a woman in her 60s, her silver hair cut in a neat bob. Patricia Harmon? Margaret asked. Yes, the woman replied, her expression guarded. My name is Margaret Wilson. My daughter Emily was on the school bus that disappeared 15 years ago. Recognition dawned in Patricia's eyes, followed quickly by discomfort. Oh, Mrs. Wilson, I'm sorry, but Robert doesn't live here anymore. I know, Margaret said quickly. Actually, I wanted to talk to you. She pulled out the photograph, pointing to the mystery woman. Do you recognize her? Patricia's face paled visibly as her eyes fixed on the image. Where did you get this? From the case files. Who is she, Mrs. Harmon? Patricia glanced nervously over her shoulder before stepping onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind her. You shouldn't be asking these questions, she whispered. It's dangerous. Margaret's heart pounded in her chest. Please, she urged. I've spent 15 years not knowing what happened to my daughter. If you know something, anything, I'm begging you to tell me. Patricia seemed to battle with herself, wringing her hands as she looked down at the photograph again. Her name is Vanessa Mercer, she finally said. She worked for some people Robert knew. What kind of people? Margaret pressed. Powerful people, the kind you don't say no to. Patricia's voice trembled. Robert got involved with them when the school was in financial trouble. He needed money, and they offered a solution. Margaret felt dizzy as the implications began to dawn on her. "The children," she whispered. "What happened to them?" Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "Robert never told me everything. He said it was safer that way. But he drank himself to death in Arizona because he couldn't live with what he'd done." "Mrs. Harmon," Margaret said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "I need to know what happened to my daughter." Patricia took a deep breath. The bus never went off the road like they said. It was all planned. That woman, Vanessa, she gave the driver instructions and payment. Robert told me once that the children were taken to a compound somewhere for adoption, he said, but I never believed that. "Adoption?" Margaret echoed, horrified. "You mean they were trafficked?" Patricia nodded miserably. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to come forward for years, but Robert said they'd kill us both if I ever told anyone." "Why are you telling me now?" "Because Robert is gone, and I'm dying of cancer," Patricia replied simply. "I have 3 months left, according to my doctors. I have nothing left to lose, and maybe this will give me some peace before I go." Margaret's mind raced. "Do you have any proof? Anything that could help find them?" Patricia hesitated, then nodded. "Robert kept a box in the attic. I never opened it, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away either. Wait here." Several minutes later, Patricia returned with a small metal lockbox. "Take it," she said. "Whatever's inside might help you find answers, but be careful who you trust with this information." Margaret called Detective Rivera immediately. Within hours, the police had obtained a search warrant for the Harmon residence and taken Patricia's statement. The lockbox contained detailed financial records, correspondence with someone identified only as VM, and a flash drive with coordinates. 3 days later, Rivera called Margaret at 2 a.m. "We found something," the detective said, her voice tense with controlled emotion. "A property in rural Nevada. We've coordinated with the FBI and local authorities to raid it tomorrow morning." "Are there children?" Margaret asked, hardly daring to hope. "We don't know yet," Rivera admitted, "but there are people living there. Margaret, I need you to prepare yourself. Even if we find survivors, it's been 15 years. They won't be the same children who disappeared." Margaret understood the warning, but nothing could have prepared her for what came next. The Nevada compound yielded 8 survivors from the original 23 children, now adults in their early 20s. Among them was a young woman with familiar eyes who, when shown a photograph, whispered, "Mom." Emily Wilson had been 10 years old when she was taken. Now 25, she bore little resemblance to the child in Margaret's treasured photographs. Years of isolation and psychological manipulation had left deep scars, both physical and emotional. But she was alive. The investigation revealed a trafficking network that had operated across state lines for decades, targeting vulnerable schools in financial distress. Principal Harmon had been approached when Pinewood Elementary faced bankruptcy, offered a solution that he later couldn't escape. Bus driver Malcolm Reeves had been found buried on the property, executed shortly after delivering the children. In the aftermath, as families were reunited with children they had mourned for 15 years, Margaret held her daughter's hand in the hospital room, learning to know her all over again. Emily spoke little at first, overwhelmed by the outside world she had been isolated from for so long. "I remembered your face," she told Margaret one evening, her voice soft. "Even when they told us to forget, I remembered you." The road to recovery would be long and fraught with challenges. Not all the families had found closure. 15 children remained unaccounted for, possibly sold to other locations. But for Margaret, the impossible had happened. Her persistence, her refusal to surrender hope, even when everyone else had moved on, had led to this moment. As news crews gathered outside the hospital, clamoring for interviews with the families of the miracle survivors, as they were being called, Margaret thought about the photograph that had started it all. One overlooked detail, one face in the background that no one had questioned, until a desperate mother refused to stop looking. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support helps us continue bringing these important investigative stories to light. And let us know in the comments, have you ever noticed a crucial detail that others missed?